Black movies. It's something we talk a lot about on the channel because I have questions. Like, who are black movies actually made for? Obvious answer, black movies are for black people.
No.
That's not entirely true. As we know, modern movie making is very closely tied to profit margins, marketing, and return on investment. When you enter what Hollywood would consider a subgenre, such as black film, there are a few assumptions being made. Number one, black films are for black people. They are the only audience that are interested in black stories, black culture, etc. Assumption number two, white people are interested in black movies so far as it centers them as heroes or gives them an opportunity to feel invited to the cookout. Or number three, black stories need some element of mainstreamness, aka whiteness, to turn a profit. Think of non-black directors creating movies about black culture. I've talked to a number of my white friends about black movies, and some of them have literally no idea what I'm talking about. That's not their fault. The marketing is not catered to them for the most part. But the movies that they do know, the hell.
She looked like the winning horse at the Kentucky Derby.
The Blind Side.
Do you have any place to stay tonight?
Moonlight. 12 Years a Slave.
You answer me truthfully. Have you any other name than Platt?
Selma.
For his white congregation.
The Butler. Do the Right Thing. And actually, I don't have a problem with this. Especially from a marketing perspective, there is merit to setting out to creating a project or getting a movie off the ground with a very specific audience in mind. That's central to a lot of the pitches that people would have to make so that Hollywood will take notice. But who's going to actually watch this movie? One of the greatest errors in most of films today is that there's a lack of understanding of their core audience. Not just the demographics, but understanding the 4 quadrants of movie making. For quadrants, it kind of looks like this: men under 25, men over 25, women under 25, and women over 25, describing an audience base. Simple enough, right? But it can be so hard to execute. The idea behind a potentially record-breaking film is that it hits all 4 of these quadrants in some way. So think Pixar. They often had that lane of being good for adults and children of all ages. The same goes to Marvel. Even if there's fatigue around superhero movies, they still perform well because they usually hit the majority of those 4 quadrants. Now take most black films. Because a mainstream audience is not primed for black people being the center of stories, they often acquiesce by hitting one subgenre of one of those quadrants. So one example is The Color Purple. The movie marketing for the 2023 musical adaptation was crossing into a quadrant of women over 25, those who had nostalgia about the original Color Purple and those who might understand the challenges of being a woman in the Reconstruction era South. But not just women. The quadrant they were hitting was black women over 25. So now we're talking about a sub-niche of a quadrant of that audience. Now that is a risk because if you can't get another quadrant from the audience to bolster those numbers, you're really forced to look at the buying power or desire to go to the theater from a sub-lane of one quadrant. And it had the double whammy in that neither men over 25 or men under 25 were interested in seeing that film that portrayed black men as an enemy to black women's freedom.
It's a terrible movie.
Now these days, I try to avoid gender war conversations since y'all were very hot at some of my other videos, but I think it's worth noting that a lot of the aim for film marketing and who it's distributed to has to hit a significant quadrant for big-time studios or producers to even consider it. So going back to our North Star question, who are black films for? If we consider our assumptions, number one, black films for black people is an obvious place to start. So these are movies that are made by black folks for black folks, and they're often niche in their references as well as their portrayals. These movies are not going to explain cultural reality. They don't really care if non-black people get the jokes or understand the nuance, and they might leave out context of explaining certain things because it's for the culture. So take, for example, the movie Boys in the Hood. John Singleton shot the film in South Side of Los Angeles where it was based, and he used actual actors from the city for his love letter to South Central. Critically acclaimed, but also unexplained if you were outside of that community. It was never about having a conversation with an audience that needed more insight, but it did reach into white spaces as a film that is taught across film courses even to this day. Another example is Love and Basketball, directed and produced by Gina Blythewood and starring Sanaa Lathan and Omar Epps. The movie was a classic in the Black community. However, the message and the importance of not only Black womanhood, femininity, relationships, and young love is not something that was heavily marketed to white men or women over the age or under the age of 25. But it hit a significant quadrant with Black men and women under the age of 25 as this coming-of-age love story. But explaining the significance to one of my white contemporaries may not have the same effect as it did on many of us in the early 2000s. So moving on to assumption number 2, Black movies need to center white heroes or inclusion of them, invited to the cookout, for example. There's nothing wrong with a diverse cast coming to an understanding of a cultural film as a main plot point. But these movies that often center white people in the Black story context can use saviors as a trope, which hopefully that has died down for good. So examples include movies like The Help or even Hidden Figures. Though these were films with Black women at the center, the not-so-subtle messaging that white allies were the reason that Black women were successful is often why these films are criticized today, even if they're well-acted and well-produced. This also gets into our Black movies that are made for white people, but only so much as white people feeling good about the experience of viewing a Black film. And again, this is not that I'm angry about this phenomenon. I understand that getting a movie takes a lot of work in order to pitch it to a studio and they to take it seriously, and then significant resources needed and the clarity about who you're creating and what you're creating. But the sacrifice that's often a thin line in having a Black movie about the Black experience centering a white savior is that it's problematic when you consider that Black culture will need those heavy-handed explanations and this over-the-topness of the villains just so that people can feel comfortable with the subject matter. So the racists are super racist, and the saints are super pure, and the bad guys are just villainous with no redemption. These films' dialogue don't really do subtlety. They're like on the nose, they ensure that the audience gets it as to not alienate anyone who might have come to the theater. The most recent example of this was American Society of Magical Negroes. Woo, child. It struggled. It struggled at the box office because it managed to piss off all 4 quadrants at the exact same time.
This movie sucks.
And there was something very inauthentic about a film that is supposed to be culturally relevant, but it's explaining itself to the mainstream audience. When something's too broad or too unspecific, it typically doesn't reach the people it actually needs to engage. So one element of this is Black movies made by white people, which is our third assumption. The surprising amount of Black films that have non-Black directors is very interesting. And again, I'm not completely against this when it's done with care and consideration, but I think it's relevant to say that Black movies that center Black experiences do benefit from a Black perspective in the director chair. Take, for example, the controversy of the 2017 film Detroit, directed by Catherine Bigelow and starring John Boyega. The movie received mixed reviews, with Catherine facing questions of whether her depictions of the 1967 riot, one of the historically most violent on American soil, was right to be in the hands of herself and the writer Mark Bowl. But I think the distinction of whether or not to be directed or written by non-Black writers really has to do with culture, not color.
So why do you need a Black director? Could a white director not have?
It's not color, it's culture. Steven Spielberg did Schindler's List.
Mm-hmm.
Martin Scorsese did Goodfellas, right? Steven Spielberg could direct Goodfellas. Martin Scorsese probably could have done a good job with Schindler's List, but they're cultural differences. You know, I know, you know, we all know what it is when a hot comb hits your hair on a Sunday morning, what it smells like. That's a cultural difference.
Agreeing with Denzel here, it's really the same question that comes up when you have Spike Lee creating Do the Right Thing. There's a specificity to the lens by which Spike sees racial issues. But I think if the subject matter is not centered on race of the film, then there may be room for other directors of all colors to tell these stories. The central issue isn't with Black movies directed by non-Black people. After all, Steven Spielberg's The Color Purple from 1985 and Sidney Lumet's The Wiz, they're both considered classic films in the Black canon. So it's not that white people can't make Black movies or shouldn't be involved in their creation. It's just really about the disproportionate amount of times that Black directors actually get to tell their stories. Ava DuVernay, a favorite on the channel, is someone who's broken so many barriers with these large budgets, but she's even talked about the challenges of getting Black stories to have that mainstream appeal.
That it's no one else's responsibility to make the things that I want to see.
Right.
It's my responsibility, and if I want to see them, then I need to make them if I'm able, and I am, so I do.
Ava's also been very successful in crossing multiple quadrants, as she has proven in her consistency it goes really beyond color lines. So Black films being made for Black people is not the only viable storytelling lane, although it's incredibly important to the nature and history of these modern day films. The question about how do we transition Hollywood's perspective and point of view on Black people's stories being for everyone is to make it plain. Movies that you've seen about white people that are critically acclaimed, they're not called white movies. They're just called movies, because the expectation is that these movies will hit the majority of people and get their attention and their money. But Black people see the quote-unquote majority films and media as well. I'm one of many Black people who watch mainstream movies, whether Black people are in them or not, and I'm unbothered by the fact that the characters don't necessarily look like me. Well, I'm a little bothered because it's not real life. Like, I was always in awe as a kid of shows like Degrassi, where diversity was just expected. It was never a question. But my white friends may not have seen most of the Black film starter pack that I've mentioned in other videos. And that's not entirely their fault. I mean, white friends, if you're watching, you absolutely can start watching those movies on your own time and get a deeper understanding of really what I'm saying.
That's racist. I don't know.
But it's not that you may have purposely avoided seeing those films. It's by design that you didn't have exposure to that content, that most of us didn't have exposure. Many of us never get the opportunity to see movies made by diverse filmmakers or even centering other experiences because that's the way they wanted it. So if anything I've said has piqued your interest, made you realize just how little of the cinema landscape you've actually been able to see, the question I would pose is, how are you taking in the art of other cultures? How do you expand your mind if you never see anything different from your own experience? We have to be willing to give solid storytelling a chance no matter where it comes from, and we can't just eat with whatever they put in front of us. So just like there's a McDonald's and a Waffle House at every exit, are we only willing to eat that which is convenient, but maybe garbage? Or would we be looking for entertainment that might open our eyes to more? That's the question. That's the idea. And my opinion is that if you do that and you expand your lens, there's so much more great content, great films to take in. We'll be talking more about that on the channel, but if you enjoyed this, I would love it if you liked this video, and also leave me a comment down below and let me know, what do you think? Are Black movies only made for Black people, or is there something else going on? Of course, I have to always shout out my Patreon. So grateful for them. They have been so consistent even when I haven't been, and I'm thankful for that. If you want to join, I've also just recently opened YouTube memberships, so feel free to join and support the community, support Redemption in Media, and support the analyses that we do on this channel. All right, I'll see you in the next one. Peace.